Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with the Golden Opportunities Coaching YouTube channel, and we are here with another audio. Like, subscribe, comment below. We're over 250 subscribers now, which is totally awesome. In any event, we're going to talk about 6 ways to know if it's time to break up with the person you're involved with. Breakups can be difficult. They're never any fun, but they often do become necessary, and especially in a world where, when we think about it, life is so fragile, especially now with COVID and all the other challenges that are going on in our world. Staying in an unhealthy or toxic relationship is the least thing we should be doing. So, what are some signs that it's time to say goodbye to a previous partner? Now, as a relationship coach, I've dealt with all of these issues, and it really does boil down to one of these 6 things at core. Now, they may show in different ways, but it does boil down to these things. First of all, and the biggest one, if the trust is gone, the relationship's already over. If you do not trust your partner, be that consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, for whatever reason, if they have given you more than one reason not to trust them. Now, I say more than one only because we can all be a little paranoid, or we can all be a little uncomfortable, or we can all be a little worried about what a person's intentions are, and certainly giving them a reason and an opportunity to talk about some of the challenges that they are experiencing or reasons they behave in a certain way, really a super good idea. But if you have multiple experiences, let's call it more than 2, so 3 and up, of reasons not to trust your partner, and you try and force it, and most people do this. Most people go, well, he never did this before. She never used to be this way. I don't have anything to worry about. She would never, even though she's talking to somebody else, she'd never cross the line physically, or, I asked her not to talk to that friend. She wouldn't betray me like that. That was an unhealthy relationship, or whatever it is. I asked him not to go drinking with his buddies, and he showed up 6 hours late for our date. Whatever it is, when the trust is gone, the relationship's already over. And what's so unfortunate is we live in a really interesting juxtaposing society now. We are social media dependent, which means we're constantly looking for the validation of somebody cares, somebody cares, somebody cares. But then we hang on to unhealthy relationships where often, I'd say 70% of the time, at least one, if not both partners, know the other person doesn't care the way they need them to, but we hold on to the relationship anyway. So it's a really interesting juxtapose that often people stay for a myriad of reasons that are none of which are healthy. And so the next one, which is really huge, is compatible value scores. So a value score is a system of values or beliefs that you hold to be true for you, that it's hard to coexist with another person if they don't value these things. For example, let's suppose one party wants children, the other party does not. Or let's suppose one person wants to live in the city and the other in the country. Or let's suppose one person likes to travel, the other person likes to be a homebody. Usually the value systems are extremely opposite each other. This can also come down to social issues like religion, politics, social issues like concerns about sexuality and race and all sorts of other things. If you are on opposite ends of the spectrum and cannot find common ground after the nature of a few conversations, and the conversations only lead to you going circularly, then the relationship is already over, because sooner or later, here's the issue: one of you is going to have to lose what you believe in, and resentment comes on the heels of that. I know in my own situation, in a relationship I was in, there were some things that ultimately I did not agree with on a moral level that my former partner was doing, and I tried to make it work for quite a while, and finally it got to the point where we were disagreeing a lot, and it led to the break of the relationship. Had I decided, hey, we aren't compatible, no matter how much we care about each other, we're just not compatible with what we value, I probably could have saved us both about 9 months to a year worth of just yuck and unfriendly stuff. And that happens even when you're in the psychological or sociological world. What happens is we have a bias. We have a bias that says, um, if I love somebody, I can either tolerate them into a way where their differences won't bother me, or I can convince them to believe the way that I do, or I'm willing to sacrifice myself to believe the way they do. But in the mind changing areas in those scenarios, it only lasts for a short period of time, because if it's not your idea naturally, you won't stick to it, you won't stay committed to it, and so that creates challenges in itself. So the other thing is, if your interests are growing away from what you used to be interested in, and this is so common, especially that in reality there's a research project that says a person's interests usually change about once every 7 to 10 years. So what you want when you're 18 and what you want when you're 30 going to be different. What you want when you're 32 and what you want when you're 41 going to be different. What you want when you get the point, right? So here's the thing: if you're growing in opposite directions, if I want to start my own business and my partner wants to start a family, one of us is going to be unhappy with that decision, because it's very hard, as one can imagine, to do both of those things simultaneously. Similarly, if one of us is wanting to save for a future big vacation and the other is wanting to save to remodel a house, and one is home-based and the other is not, or one wants to go back to school and spend time on their career and one wants to spend time on family, again, it's kind of like the value thing being different, but also when we grow in other directions, we change social circles. And so if you have a person who you knew all their friends until you were 25, and then in their 25th year, between 25 and 27, they get a whole new friend group, and their interest changed, and their personality changed, and all of a sudden it's like, who am I with anymore? It's probably time to separate that relationship out. The next few are really simple, but they need to be mentioned. Of course, the next one is abuse. This speaks to mental, emotional, physical, sexual, financial abuse, psychological as well. Any area where there is abuse or neglect of a person's emotions, feelings, or danger to their body, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, it's time to leave. And here's the truth on that. It's extremely unlikely, somewhere between 10 to 15%, that an abusive person will ever change when they're in a relationship where abuse has already occurred. That happens in approximately 10 to 15%, and that may even be high, of situations. Now, an abusive person can change if they deal with themselves, and usually that takes a couple of years, but it can happen. But when there's already that trigger point of we have abused each other, we have mistreated each other, or one person is doing the mistreating and the other person's taking it, it's too easy to fall into that automatic pattern, and the likelihood of that being fixed is about 10%. So if you have been abused by a partner, if you have been, hit or struck or burned or sexually assaulted or constantly yelled at or any other number of unpleasant things, it's time to exit the relationship, because the likelihood that things are ultimately going to change is very, very low. The next one goes hand in hand with it in a lot of ways: addiction. Now, there is such a thing known as an APT. An APT is an addictive personality type. That is to say that the human brain can wire towards addiction. Now, usually when we say addiction, we think negative, like alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, gambling, and all sorts of other bad habits. And for the majority of people, this is the case. If you're dealing with a person who has an addiction and doesn't want to get help for it, leave. Be done. A lot of times addiction, depending on how long it's going on, can actually get worse because it is in the brain of the other person to an unhealthy degree. That is to say that it is ensconced in the mental makeup of a person in such a way that they don't even realize they're doing it, and it's in the automatic part of their brain. Now, a person who chooses to get help for their addiction, yes, you can see a person through that, but they have to be committed to getting the help. And usually, I'd say about 85 to 90% of the time, getting help for an addiction is a lifelong commitment in one form or another, whether it's behavior modification changes, whether it's support group meetings, NA, GA, AA, or whatever, whether it's changing locations. There are some major life alterations that need to change when a person wants to break an addiction. If they are not committed to the change for the long haul, it's time to leave the relationship, because you will eventually resent them for their inability or unwillingness to commit completely to their evolution and their growth and changes. And that leads me into the final point, and that is growth. So there's an old saying that says, if it's not growing, it's dying. So it's a paradoxical statement, and the idea is we either are moving forward or we're standing in one place and we're waiting to die. And so when a relationship isn't growing, when there's no new goals, when there's no new aspirations, when we're not talking about the things that are coming up next week or next month or our dreams for a year or 5 years from now, when those conversations aren't happening, if at all, it's time to leave the relationship, simply because you have gotten to a place where you plateau, and then what begins to happen is that growth that we seek outside the relationship. Now that can show as an affair, that can show as working extra, that can show as engaging in hobbies to an excessive rate, but we look for growth in other areas because the human body, mind, and spirit needs growth to survive. And so ultimately, without that growth to survive, things will die off in time. Breakups are hard, and certainly I do offer relationship coaching for couples that are considering breaking up, or for couples that have been through a recent breakup and they're getting back to the dating world for the first time. If that's something that would be helpful, send a message to me on Twitter at PO Perception, or you can message me right here on YouTube. Either way, hope this has been helpful to you. We will be back with more content here momentarily, but until then, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Till next time, everybody.